Hey guys, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am so glad you are here. Please feel free to share and post and ask your questions and engage in whatever ways you feel safe enough to do so. Today's video is all about how to heal the wounded inner child and sort of like what does that mean and what does it take to heal, what is reparenting, and how does a person go about beginning to do this work? Okay, let's talk, for example, about what a wounded inner child can look like. I think this concept can be a little confusing for people. It's like, is it a separate thing? Is it part of you? What does it look like? I think a good way to describe it is that we often are walking around in our adult bodies, but we're carrying some story, some pain, some experience of often the part of us that is somewhere between the ages of like 5 and 9 years old. And if you can let yourself drift back to that age, for most of us, you're just old enough to really begin to start to really be aware of adults and the differences between you and adults and the rules in the world. And when you're sort of not, winning at what you're doing, like if you lose a game or you compete in something. But at the same time, you don't have the adult brain to self-reflect and make sense of what happens to you. And so because children are basically, for a certain period of time, egocentric, meaning that they really feel like the world revolves around them, right? And so if something bad happens in the world, we internalize often that it's our fault. We did something wrong. Now, it's not necessarily we think I'm bad, I did something wrong. It's just the nature of how our brains are working and our interpretations of the world. Also, because it's not really safe to think about our caregivers being bad, like my mom is incompetent or is mentally ill, or my dad is, he has rage problems. He's a narcissist and that's all about him. We don't do that. When they treat us in ways that are hurtful or other people do, at that age, it's our fault in some way. It's our fault. And so we internalize that. And oftentimes we carry that wounded, it's still my fault, there's still something wrong with me, as a part of ourselves. And I think it's really important to understand the concept of parts. There's a lot of therapies and theories that talk about this idea. IFS is one, but the idea is that there's a wounded part, and the child is a wounded part of us. It doesn't mean that I don't have other parts that aren't competent and capable and can, show up in the world in really powerful ways, but there's still oftentimes that little part inside that is wounded and is the child. And the challenge is that wounded child part can be pretty strong. And even though as an adult we can have an experience, it often gets interpreted, what is our role, what did we do, through the lens of the internal wounded child. And so the internal wounded child is like just this lived experience in all of us. It is our whole story, but yet it's still a very limited child in times. It didn't really grow. It still sees the world through the lens of that 5 to 9-year-old sometimes. Now it might become more mature, in terms of the language or how it tries to make sense of things, but that visceral gut reaction is often the child's reaction. Now, how else do we know what it looks like to have a wounded inner child? Here are some common signs and symptoms that you might have a wounded inner child. Now, you might also really quickly have these signs and symptoms, and they may be related to other issues, but these tend to really cluster. And if you think about your childhood and you had some either, neglectful or disengaged parenting or emotionally unsafe parenting on some spectrum, these are all really common. We can have a feeling that there is something deeply wrong with us. I often say that the shame voice, that voice that Brene Brown talks about, the voice that says, like I was saying, you're not good enough, who do you think you are? That internalized voice of shame, I believe, is often a combination of the wounded child talking and the parent or the childhood we internalized. Our parents may have actually said that. Their lack of actions made us feel that way. If you loved me more, you would have been more emotionally invested, and so I'm not good enough. But the core of that shame voice and something being wrong with us is a very common dynamic for those of us who have a wounded inner child. We can see being a people pleaser, a compulsive caretaker, certainly having chronic mental and physical health issues, being driven to have, perfectionistic tendencies and being an overachiever, being controlling. We even know that children of borderline mothers, for example, tend to be more controlling. And that's because I think we're just trying to manage things, right, in a world that feels out of control. We can have levels of really high self-doubt and be constantly critical and judgmental of ourselves and others. We can have shame around our bodies and intimacy and fear around really what it feels like to be exposed to somebody else that puts us in a vulnerable position. We can have a constant deep mistrust of others at the core, just not really believing that people will be there for us or show up for us. We can certainly have issues around setting boundaries and holding them and feeling worthy of those things. We can have a hard time starting and finishing tasks and following through. And we can be prone to numbing and addictions and just a deep fear of never really being loved for who we are. Now, these are all, some of the core things we can see. And so then you say, okay, well, yeah, that's me. What do I do about it? So what I wanted to share was a protocol I developed around how to heal the wounded inner child. And because I believe that we have the wounded inner child, then we have that shame voice that often talks to the child and says, who do you think you are, like I said, or you're not lovable, you're not worthy. It may just be a feeling you have. You may not actually say those words to yourself, but the way your life is set up has really reinforced that actually you don't really value your time, your health, your feelings, your emotions, your relationships, because maybe you take too much or you sacrifice your own well-being at the service of pleasing others, for example, in terms of being like a compulsive caretaker, where your really only role in life is to take care of others, often to your own detriment. So you have this wounded child, you have this shame voice, and then you have this internalized parent inside. This is the part of you that is now the adult, that is like, okay, there's the shame child, but I'm also the adult. I am the person in charge of trying to live and heal my life. And it really is true that no one is going to come and say, oh, did you take care of yourself enough today? Are you loving on yourself? Maybe your therapist once a week, maybe a loving partner will remind you. But certainly the way the world works, it's like it really is incumbent upon us to try to heal that. And so I believe that the really only way to do that is through reparenting ourselves. And I'm not the only one, obviously, that believes this, but it really is this internalized, I call it the mothering energy. And the reason why I do that, although it can be anyone, not even a female, not using the word mother, but generally speaking, mothering biologically and historically has been this energy towards nurturing and protecting and soothing. And so I developed a 3-part protocol really focused on those categories: self-nurturing, self-safety, and self-soothing. And the general principles are that you have to meet yourself as that internalized parent that has to meet the child with what we do and what we say. So it's not just about saying, I love you. I think it's a really hard concept to imagine, just saying, I love you, you're worthy to yourself, or putting it on a sticky note. I think it's also hard for some people to even do the imagery exercises on imagining themselves as a child holding and loving themselves, though all of that can be very helpful too. And so what else besides that, though, can we do? And I created in my course some meditations, some affirmations, a lot of exercises. And so because of all the research on understanding that trauma lives in our bodies, I believe that we have to do and say things that help us deal with that trauma, because the truth is that repetitive childhood wounds is basically often relational trauma, is complex trauma. When you were, not really met in the ways that helped heal you as a child. And we all have, like I said, some of these. It's just some of us have a lot more. So through the protocol, we focus on how to understand how to nurture yourself. And the basic principles are that you look at things like, how do you feed yourself? How do you exercise? Or do you? Do you take care of yourself and take naps and listen to your body? Do you, know that neglecting your dental health for long periods of time is actually disregarding yourself? And that's a very common thing. Like in COVID, for example, a lot of us have neglected, myself included, standard medical appointments. But over time, there can be consequences. So nurturing at the core is about what you say to yourself and what you do, like a loving mother energy would do. And so all of these really are led by the principles of two things. What does my body need right now, or what does my body need in general? And what would a loving, internalized mothering energy or parenting energy say or do or remind me of right now? So those two things really dictate, what do I need in self-nurturing? What does it look like to take care of myself? The second one is self-safety. And this is really about boundaries, self-protection, looking at enmeshment in unhealthy relationships, understanding that you have to do and say some things to protect yourself, like a loving mother would. A loving mother doesn't let you just run in the street, or a loving parent, they try to help teach you that when you cross the street, you have to look both ways. They try to teach you that, running after a ball when it runs out in the street without looking is a dangerous thing to do. But many of us didn't learn how to protect ourselves in childhood. In fact, we had to lay down protections to survive. We had to say, my physical boundaries don't matter. My emotional boundaries don't matter. I have to be flexible and wrap my life around yours to survive. And so the second part of the protocol is about teaching you how to set up boundaries and protections in all the areas of your life. And I go through toxic relationships, toxic hope, where you almost pathologically, understandably so, we do this. We attach ourselves to some illusion about how life is going to be okay, or this person's going to keep hurting us, but nothing's going to change and that's going to be okay, but it's okay for us to just stay in it because they're family or we don't have anyone else. So that's one part. And the third part is really about self-soothing. And that is really about incorporating the parts of your trauma living in your body and your nervous system and your attachment wounds in terms of how to do things to soothe your body, whether it's exercise, imagery exercises, guided meditations, learning how to sing or hum or regulate your nervous system out of those states I've talked about, the ventral vagal, which is the calm, soothing state, the connected state, the sympathetic state, which is the mobilized, energetic state, often thought of as fight or flight, but it is more than that, but that's the general state, or that collapsed, often depressed dorsal vagal state. And so we're always moving through those states, but we can get stuck in, responsive patterns that can be our go-tos when our inner child is wounded. And so we get triggered, let's say, the inner child gets triggered, and our go-to is to collapse or to go in hyper-anxious mode, right? A very anxious dynamic, or energetic fight or flight, which sometimes we need, but oftentimes doesn't serve us. And so through self-nurturing, self-safety, and self-soothing, the goal is to really take all of those and every day begin to try to hit one of each target or more, at a minimum just one, to learn how what you need to do and say and how to engage in your life. Because otherwise we just kind of live on automatic pilot. That wounded child wants to sit and watch Netflix for 12 hours, which, I can do it, right? That wounded child wants to panic and leave important situations that our anxiety is telling us we need to leave, but to benefit our life, we need to engage in. That wounded child wants to go into protective mode and make everything about everyone else and neglect ourselves to the point that our autoimmune illness is, let's say, out of control, or we feel that we resent others because we just take care of everyone else and no one takes care of us. And so that is really what it takes to heal your inner child. So thank you so much for watching today. I'm so glad you guys were here. Please consider checking out my course. As I said, I'm not a salesperson, but I believe with my whole heart that these courses can change the course of your life in terms of how you see yourself and relationships. The Remothered course really does go into polyvagal theory, complex trauma, how to actually connect to your inner child, ways to do that. There are exercises, meditations, a lot of challenging questions about how to unpack and explore your childhood, and really just so many tools and resources at your disposal. As I was making the course, I'm really building that course on healing from borderline and narcissistic parents. There's so much in that course, on how to heal, but I also realized that, and there is a whole section in that course too on your wounded inner child, but that just focusing on your inner child is a whole other part of the journey. And I really wanted to add and share that to the toolbox that you might consider having. So please feel free to share your ideas and know that I care so much about what you guys think in terms of how I can help you and heal. I truly appreciate your time here, and I don't take it for granted. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Take care.